Assalamu alaikum. Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Dear students, today we will talk about the species category. First of all, outlines. What is species category? What is topological species concept? And then criticism. Then we will discuss nominalistic species concept. Then criticism. We will discuss biological species concept, their applications and limitations. Various other species concepts. Outlines of today's lecture will be like after watching and listening to this lecture, student will know about the species category. There are different species concept, so student will know about the different species categories and the concepts. Species is the most important category of taxonomic hierarchy. As we discussed this in the previous lectures, that in taxonomic hierarchy, the basic category is species category. That's why it's very important, because actually we start from species, so it's very important. So species can be defined as a group of closely related organisms which are capable of interbreeding to produce fertile offspring. So as the general normal definition, you already know this definition, that it is a group of actually closely related organisms which can interbreed and which can produce fertile offsprings. So occasionally two organisms which are not from the same group species, but they are like genetically or they are closely related. Like for example, you know the donkey and horse, Equus caballus and Equus asinus. So they are like closely related because both of them they belong to the same genus Equus. So Equus caballus and Equus asinus. The horse and the donkey sometimes they may interbreed, or other species like them which are closely related genetically, they can interbreed sometimes or occasionally and produce a fertile offsprings. A cross between a donkey and a horse, for example, will produce a mule which is infertile. So here we were actually talking about the rare cases. Sometimes it happens science, and sometimes it happens, but not always. So like if we cross the Equus asinus, the donkey, with the Equus caballus, the horse, so it will produce a mule which is actually infertile. It will be hybrid of the both. And by definition, therefore, a donkey and a horse should be described as different species. Why? Because they cannot interbreed and they cannot produce fertile offspring. The cross will produce an infertile mule. So, by definition, we can say that donkey is a different species and horse is a different species. So now mule show some of the advantages of both types of parents, which is called hybrid vigor. Like the mules, they are used for very hard works. So this is mule, which is infertile, and it is actually a hybrid of a horse and a donkey. So Cuvier in 1929 defined a species as the assemblage descended from one another or from common parents and of those who resemble each other. So here we will go through some definitions. So the first one is by Cuvier in 1929, who defined species as actually a species is a assemblage or descended from one another or from common parents. So species are groups whose parents will be common and of those who resemble each other, and they will also resemble each other. So they are descended. These are assemblages. These species are assemblages that are descended from one another or from common ancestors, or common parents, or those who resemble each other as species. Thomson in 1937 defined species as a group of individuals distinguished by irreducible set of constant properties and connected by descendant and genetic relationship. Uh, Here in case of Thomson is a group of individual which is distinguished from other groups by irreducible set of constant properties. Mean a species will have some constant properties which are not reducible, which will not reduce, and they are connected. The species are connected by descendant and genetic relationship. So descendant mean they are from the common parents, and genetic mean they are genetically similar. So this is what Thomson defined. So how Thomson defined species. Then Huxley in 1942 defined species as a geographical definable group. Mean a species can be defined geographically. Mean they will occupy a same geography. They will be living in a close proximity in one geographical region, whose member actually interbreed. So their members will actually interbreed potentially capable of interbreeding in nature. Mean they have the potential, but sometime it happens that two population, if they are away from each other, they are living in different geographical areas. In the previous lecture I give you the example that, for example, dogs of Lucky Marwat, they cannot interbreed with the dogs of the Kohut because they are very far away from each other. But if you bring them together, they can interbreed because they have the potentiality. In the same way, Equuscabulus, they are living in Kohut, and Equuscabulus who are living in Lucky Marwat or in Waziristan Jansi, they cannot interbreed. But if you bring them together, they can interbreed. So which normally in nature does not interbreed freely or with full fertility with other related groups. So now a geographically definable group whose member actually interbreed or potentially capable of interbreeding in nature. But there is another aspect. They normally do not interbreed freely with other related groups. So for example, Equuscabulus, they do not interbreed with Equus asinus, mean donkey cannot enter. Normally, they do not interbreed with horses, but sometimes it happens, and it is distinguished from them by constant morphological differences. And yet another important thing is that they are morphologically distinguished. So, one, they are like a geographically definable group, and they interbreed with each other freely, or they have potential of the interbreeding. In nature, they do not interbreed with related groups freely or full fertility, and they are also different morphologically by constant morphological differences. Like now donkey is like they have constant morphological differences with horses, so they are very different from each other morphologically. So this is how they defined species. uh, Species concepts. So there are different species concepts. Like Mayer in 1957 reviewed the work of other taxonomists on species problem. So it was a complex problem from very start. So different scientists or different groups of schools of thoughts were there. Some of them, they were of the thought that species are fixed, and some were even they thought the species is not fixed. The evolution is there. Uh, but with the passage of time, there were different ideas, and Mayer in 1957 reviewed all the work of taxonomists on species problem, and came to the conclusion that all the definition given by earlier workers can be broadly grouped into three main concepts. So there are many other concepts, so we will discuss them, but there are three main concepts, which is typological species concept. So it was the scientists who were supporting the topological species concept. they have this idea that species is fixed. And then there is nominalistic species concept, and then there is biological species concept. So these three were the basic species concept. Beside these three, there are many other important species concept like evolutionary species concept, mate recognition species concept, phonetic species concept, phylogenetic species concept, isolated species concept, cohesion species concept, and many other were there. So let's start from the typological species concept. So this was actually the concept of pre-Darwinians. So the people or scientists who were believing in this typological species concept were actually pre-Darwinian. The people who were even they were in favor of abiogenesis. So the scientists who were supporting this idea was actually from pre-Darwinian period. So most important figure in this regard was Carl Linnaeus. So even Carl Linnaeus, and you know that Carl Linnaeus was a supporter of abiogenesis. So the Carl Linnaeus and many other scientists, they were supporters of the typological species concept. So root of this theme of the typological species concept, it came from a Greek philosopher. It is Plato and Aristotle. So actually, the idea of typological species concept, it came from these two scientists. So it was more philosophical concept as compared to, you can say, scientific. It was more philosophical, not scientific. According to this concept, the species was thought as immutable entity. Mean species will not mutate. There will be no mutation. There will be no change in species. So species was considered as entity which will not mutate throughout time. So like species is fixed entity with space and time, and members of the species are thought to be replica of the same time of the same type or platonic idios. So like as the idea was from Plato, so they thought that species is fixed and there is no change in species produce exact replica, which they called same type, or they called it platonic idios, mean replica of the same. So this was typological species concept. So the follower of this concept were called typologists, and the species concept show individuality. Like for typologists, the different thing was actually different. So for them, there is no change in species. The morphologically actually different like individual was different from them for them, but like not the way around. Like for example, today we say that there is sublink species like which are morphologically very similar, but they are reproductively isolated. So they were not of this idea, and they do not accept evolution or changes in the species. So they were actually believers in fixity of species. So for example, typologists, so for them the different thing was actually different. So this species concept is also called essentialism or essentialistic species concept. According to the species concept, species is conserved and recognized by their essential nature or essential characters, like for example color, size, and habitat. And you know, in today in the modern taxonomy, we do not rely just on color or size as habitat. Sometimes color are same, but they are different species. So size may be the same, but they are different species. Maybe they are living in the same habitat, but they will be different species. So we do not rely on such characteristics. These characteristics are expressed in their morphology. That's why this concept can also be known as morphological species concept. And this postulate of this topological species concept were like species consist of similar individuals sharing the same essence. Means species consist of similar individuals. So similar individuals are species. So any slight difference, they were not accepting any slight difference. So like different, if there is a difference, so they will consider them as a different, they would consider them as a different species, not the same species. So species consist of similar individual that which share same essence. And second, each species is separated from other species by a short discontinuity. Mean there is a short gap between two species, so they are very there is short discontinuity from one species to another species. Mean they have very slight differences one species and another species. But today we do not believe in such concepts, because we say there are populations, different populations which are going through speciation. So like we say subspecies, sibling species, incipient species. So today we have these ideas, so we do not accept this, but it was the idea of pre-Darwinian and scientists of their time. So each species is completely constant through time. And the third one, that there is no change in species. Species is very clearly completely constant through time and space. There will be no change. There are strict limitation to variation in a species. So they were believing in fixity of species, that there will be no variation. Criticism. So according to this concept, species are fixed with time. While it is evident that there are striking differences in species, individuals of age, so age differences are there, sex differences are there, polymorphism is there, sexual dimorphism is there. There today you can see that birds, the same belong to the male and female belong to the same species, but there will be a lot of morphological difference. Like sometime you will not even recognize them as the same species. Like for example, if you take an example of quail, a bird, so if you look at the male and female of the quail, so you will consider them as a different species, but yet this belong to the same species. They are just male and female. So this is sexual dimorphism though. So they are very different from each other like morphologically, but they belong to the same species. And there are age differences there, polymorphism are there. According to this species concept, every species member have sharp differences from other species member. So according to this species concept, each and every species member have sharp differences from other species. But today we say that there are species like sibling species which are quite similar morphologically to each other, but they are only reproductively isolated from each other. That's why this concept was rejected. Then there is a nominalistic species concept. So this species concept was proposed by Occam and his followers, and they denied the existence of real universals. They denied topological species concept. So they totally rejected this real universals, or like the species, the species topological species concept. They totally rejected it, and they believed that only individual exists. So they say that only individual exists, while the species are man-made or that's man-own creation. So they were not believing in species. So they said that the nature only produce individuals and nothing more. So this concept was popular in France during 18th century. Buffon, Lamarck, Jean Baptiste, Robinet, they were the prominent scientists. They were followers of this concept. So currently it is used by some botanists only, but it is rejected. So minimalistic species concept is we discussed. So Bessie in 1908 expressed this concept as like nature produces individuals and nothing more. Species have no actual existence in nature. These are mental concepts of human beings and nothing more. So according to Bessie, species is nothing, but it's just mental concept. We mentally produced the term species, and there is no such thing, and nature only produce individuals. Species have been invented in order that we may refer to great number of individual collectively. So the Bessie, he was of the idea that species term has been created just to refer to a great number of individuals collectively. Criticism. So no biologist can agree with the idea that species are human made. So it was like rejected. It is a known and established fact that these are the products of evolution. So species is actually the product of evolution. It's not man-made. So then the most important one, the most conspicuous one, is the biological species concept. So biological species concept is the most prominent species concept, and it came forward after Darwin theory of organic evolution. So when organic evolution or the theory evolution was presented by Darwin, and when evolution was accepted, so then scientists they put forward this concept, the biological species concept. So it was actually a long story. It was formulated by many scientists in a very rudimentary form, but then T. Dobzhansky and Ernst Mayr they like formulated it in a very formal form. So this concept is the combination of topological and nominalistic species concept. According to this species concept, species are actually or potentially interbreeding populations which are reproductively isolated from other such group. So it's now very simple. Like species are actually or potentially. So we have like 2 or 3 times we discussed this, like what means by actually and what means by potentially interbreeding populations which are reproductively isolated from other such groups. So this was actually biological species concept. So this definition of biological species was given by Mayer in 1942. Mayer in 1983 then redefined the biological species concept as a species as a reproductive community of different population which is reproductively isolated from others that occupy specific niche in nature. So, species is a reproductive community, a reproductive unit of different populations, but keep in mind that this population is reproductively isolated from other and that occupy a specific niche in nature. Or interbreeding populations of individuals having common descendant. So interbreeding population and having common descendant, common parents, so is called species. So this concept is also called Merian concept. According to this concept, species have 3 distinct functions, which are the first one is reproductive community. A species will be a reproductive community. So a member of a species form a reproductive community. So all member of a species will consist of a reproductive community because they are reproductively isolated from other such species. So like for example Homo sapien, the man, human being, they have a reproductive community because they reproduce, they mate with each other only, they do not mate with other groups with which they share their niche or their environment. They recognize each other as potential mate and seek each other for the purpose of reproduction. So for example, like Equus Equus cabilis and Equus asinus. These are two species, different species, although they belong to the same genus, and they are like very closely related. But Equus cabilis have a like isolated reproductive community, and Equus asinus have another reproductive community. So they are like totally both of them they have different reproductive communities. So the Equus asinus, the donkey, will seek donkey for reproduction purposes, and the Equus cabilis, the horse, will seek a horse for like a female horse for reproductive purpose. So they will recognize each other as a potential mate. So now the donkey will not recognize the horse as a potential mate because they belong to different communities, different reproductive communities. And they are species will be an ecological unit because they will share or they will be living and in the same ecology, and they will share this ecology with other such groups. So species is an ecological unit regardless of the individual composing it. So what the individuals are there, but species is an ecological unit, and it interact as a unit with other species with which it share the environment. So they will interact with the rest of the environment, with the rest of the ecosystem, but they will be in ecological unit. And the third is genetic unit. So species is also a genetic unit consisting of a large intercommunicating gene pool, whereas the individual is mere or temporary merely or a temporary vessel holding only a small portion of a gene pool. So now like consider the whole population of the world of the human being Homo sapien. So all human beings of the world, they are actually a genetic unit, and all of them they have a small amount of the DNA inside them. A genetic unit mean, or genetic material mean, a DNA inside of them. But if you consider the genes of the whole world population of the human beings, if you collectively, if you consider them, so it's a pool, it's a gene pool. So for example, I am a human being, and I have I'm holding a small portion of that whole pool. So I have a very small amount of DNA inside me, and then another human being, and another human being. So Asia, and then Europe, and then Americas, and then the Australia, and all the people, all the human beings living throughout the world, consider them as a gene pool. All their genes, consider them as a gene pool, and we intercommunicate these genes with each other. For example, like human beings, they marry with each other. From like people marry from Asia to someone in Europe, and from Europe to someone to Africa, and Africa to America, and America to Australia. And this the gene flow, it intercommunicate, it flow from one individual to another individual. But the single individual, that is merely or temporary, just a temporary vessel which is holding a very small portion of that whole gene pool. So actually it's a genetic unit. So a species is a genetic unit. So all donkeys of the world, they are they are consisting of a that also a genetic unit. And all horses of the world is another genetic unit. All cats of the world is another genetic unit. So every species is a genetic unit. See you in the next part of this lecture. If you have any question, please ask.